How many people here are designers or front-end developers or anything like that? So a lot of front-end people. Great. How many people are familiar with Joomla templating in general? Built a Joomla template? A couple people. Great. Great, great. So what we're going to talk about today is building Joomla templates. And we're going to talk about building them in the context of using these tools called the Joomla User Interface Libraries. Before I get too started, I just really want to thank you all for coming to this presentation. There's 2 other talks going on right now, so I appreciate you skipping out on those and coming to this one. I really appreciate you doing that. I know that at least one of the other talks is really good, and I really wanted to be there, so thank you again for coming to this one. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I promise I'll keep it really, really short. And as I talk about what I do, I'm also going to give you a little bit of history on Joomla templating in general. So I work at a company called Cohesive Websites. I'm the lead technical developer there. I write a lot of PHP code. I write a lot of CSS, JavaScript, and Less and things like that. I've been doing Joomla work for probably 7 years or more. Joomla is something that I'm really passionate about and have been spending way too much of my free time working on. And so I do a lot of Joomla stuff at work in addition to just working in Joomla for clients. And finally, on top of all of that, I am a PHP guy. I've been doing PHP work for the last 3 or 4 years, and PHP is slowly starting to creep into the rest of what I do. I do a lot of work in the Joomla world as well. This is stuff that I do basically volunteer. And the biggest thing that I do is I'm a CMS contributor. CMS contributor is pretty much anyone who works on Joomla, and you're all CMS contributors just by being users. I, in general, contribute in a couple different ways. One is I test patches for bug fixes and things like that. I make pull requests to the CMS to try and fix things and contribute to the CMS that way. And I also post a lot on mailing lists, try to contribute to the discussions, decision makings, just offering my opinion as much as possible. In addition to the CMS work, I also work on the framework. The framework is the code that kind of lies underneath Joomla, and it's what powers Joomla. So it's a set of PHP libraries, and this is something that is kind of new and coming out of the closet in terms of being a usable library for people. And this is something that I spend a lot of my time on as well. And then lastly, I am a Google Summer of Code administrator. I've been doing Google Summer of Code for 3 years, and without going into detail, basically what Google Summer of Code is it's a program for university students of any age to work on free open source projects. And basically what happens is Google pays a student, and then someone like me administers the students and hooks them up with mentors, and they contribute to free open source projects like Joomla. This is something that I'm really passionate about, really excited about, and I spend a lot of my free time working on. So why am I here talking about templates? What have I been doing with templates in Joomla? Why does it matter? All that good stuff. I'm going to tell you a story, and we're going to take a little time trip. We're going to go back to the year 2007. Who knows what this is? It's a TARDIS, yes. So I have bonus points for anyone who could tell me what TARDIS stands for.
Time and relational dimensions in space.
There we go. All right. I think I owe you a free component or something like that at the end of the talk. Great. So we're going to go to the year 2007. And in 2007, I am in upstate New York. And I'm working for a company called Cohesive Websites still. And we're building Joomla templates. And we're building templates like this, or we're building Joomla sites. We're building sites like this. We're going to template companies, and we're grabbing a template from them. We're kind of customizing it, right? We're adding in their logos, we're adding in their colors, their branding, and we're building these Joomla sites. So this is off the shelf, right? Off the shelf template production, off the shelf Joomla sites. It works. It's not great, but it works. So it's kind of like taking the oatmeal and you got the base, right? And then you pour in the hot water and you end up with, something of substance at the end. It's not great, but it's accomplishing the goal. But then we had some clients come up to us and they said, we don't want this mushy template. We want a real template. We want to send you a designer and we want you to build a template, basically from scratch. And they said, you need to learn how to do this. So starting with Joomla 1.5, my job became learn how to build Joomla templates, build them and do them right, do them pixel perfect. The designer's going to be screaming at you if you have one pixel off or one font size not right or one typeset not correct. You need to learn how to do this. So in Joomla 1.5, 2007, Chad learns how to build Joomla templates. We're going to fast forward a little bit. We're going to go into 2010. 2010, does anyone know what happened in the Joomla world that was a pretty big change for Joomla? Yes, he's the man over here. Okay, you get 2 components. What's that? Joomla 1.6 is released. So Joomla 1.6 is released, and we have this problem. Some things have changed for template developers. Templates aren't produced the same way anymore. There's some changes. And so as someone who's building templates, I had to learn about the differences between Joomla 1.5 and Joomla 1.6 and how to build templates. So I wrote a blog post. And I originally posted this blog post on our company website, and I published it out on social media and Twitter and stuff, and other developers said, hey, that's a really great blog post. You should post it on community.joomla.org. So I got a hold of some people, and I rewrote it a little bit, put in some nicer graphics and made it look nice, and put it on community.joomla.org. It was a fairly well-published blog post. It got lots of comments, got lots of, just in general, people were excited that someone was sharing this information. So I was blogging about, at this point in time, really got into blogging about template development and things like that. So we're going to fast forward again, hop back into our TARDIS. We're going to go forward another 3 years. And what happened in 2013? You can't answer. Bootstrap, I heard a couple things.
2.5.
2.5. How about 3.0 as well?
Yeah.
3.0, the big one. So Joomla 3.0 is released. And in Joomla 3.0, there is a lot of new stuff when it comes to templates, right? There's all sorts of stuff in templates that have changed for Joomla. There's this Bootstrap, and there's all sorts of new JavaScript and things like that. So Joomla 3 is probably the biggest change in template development for designers and developers, front-end developers, that has ever been in Joomla. So what did that entail? And just to mention, the JUI libraries, they're in Joomla 3. That's where it all kind of started with what we're going to be getting into. And I was involved a little bit in the effort of building these libraries, along with Mr. Michael Babker over here was also involved. And in particular, a guy named Kyle Ledbetter, who really led the effort here. I'm almost caught up with my notes. All right, one more. So what are these Joomla user interface libraries? What do they do? How do you as template developers start using this stuff? Why is it useful? And why should you start using it? I'll explain a little bit about what it is. It's essentially a collection of media. It is Bootstrap, as someone mentioned, but it's Bootstrap more than just giving you a compiled Bootstrap version. It is Bootstrap made up of individual components of JavaScript and uncompiled less. And if the word less scares you, does anyone not know what less is? One person. Okay. I'm actually really excited that most people are familiar with less. This is great. I did not expect that. So I do have a quick couple slides on less. I'll explain briefly what it is, but I'm glad that most everyone's familiar with it. That's great. So we've got less, we've got JavaScript, we've got Bootstrap kind of as a result of that, and then we have some markup standards. Everyone's starting to use the same markup because the class names are the same. There's a general style to how HTML and markup is getting written. So this is really great. What are the problems that we were trying to solve, though? Why did we have to do the Joomla user interface? So in Joomla 1.5 and 1.6 and 2.5, we had some serious problems. If you took a template and you installed it, and that template developer had decided to veer away from the Joomla core and use their own JavaScript or use their own CSS, which as template developers, you're doing a lot of that, or you're a front-end developer, you want to be writing your own JavaScript and your own CSS. Nothing wrong with that. But the problem is that extension developers were not in the same boats as the template developers. They were going opposite directions. So one template developer is using MooTools and he's using all this JavaScript library stuff, and then another extension developer, they're using jQuery, completely different JavaScript library. And you would get conflicts. The $ selectors and things like that were not working well together. No conflict modes, solving some problems, but not everything. You just have a mess. Nothing's working. And the front-end users who are trying to use these tools and install extensions, they have no idea how to fix this. They're not developers. They're just trying to install extensions and make things work. So we had a major JavaScript problem. On top of that, just CSS conflicts in general. Class names that are named the same, duplicated, different extension developers have different ideas about what they're supposed to be doing. CSS is being overridden and prioritized over different things. It's just a mess here. And it's not consistent. Someone came up to me at an event and they said, when I work in Joomla, it's like having the same header, the same logo at the top, and the same footer at the bottom, and completely different interfaces on every single other page. The form doesn't look the same as the notification center or the profile page. Nothing looks like it was done by the same person, because it really wasn't, right? So this is just a major problem. And as people, developers, we have this idea that we want to write code that can be reused, right? We want to write it once, use it a bunch of different times, and just have a really clean code base. And we're ending up with multiple JavaScript libraries that do essentially the same thing. They all do the same thing, and they're just duplicating, and we're getting massive amounts of reproduced code that just does the same stuff, and it's messy, and it's dirty, and it's just terrible. So essentially, we have this dry method. Dry means do not repeat yourself. And we are repeating ourselves all over the place at this point in time. So we came up with the Joomla user interface libraries. And this solves a lot of problems for us. How does it solve JavaScript conflicts? We said we're going to use jQuery. We're going to switch away from mootools. We're going to use jQuery. We're going to give you one version of jQuery, and you should use it. If you don't use it, that's fine. Can't tell you you're not going to use it. But you owe it to your users, and you're responsible to your users for any problems that they might have. There's stuff here, you can use it, it's useful. If you don't, hey, your problem, you deal with it, but we've supplied you with the basic amount of things that you should need to accomplish most of your goals. So we encourage this single JavaScript library. And we increased consistency. Everyone's using the same markup. Everyone's using the same standards. When you change something in CSS, it changes everything across all of the different extensions you're using, which is exactly how CSS is supposed to work. It is a major, major improvement. And I also say that this is really useful for rapid development. As a developer, mostly as a developer, I want to start writing a Joomla component or an application in Joomla, and the last thing I want to worry about is, I got to design this thing too. I just want to build. I want to write code and work with my database and get data in, get data out, and set up a workflow for an application. So using something like the JUI allows me to not focus on what kind of user actions do I have to support. I can ignore that. I can worry about that later, and I can work on building a great application. So all of these problems come out of these things, and we're able to solve them with the Joomla user interface libraries. Now, is this solution absolutely perfect? Is it foolproof? It's not. It's not. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of complaints. There are opinions involved. There's religion involved. There's stuff, right? But it's not perfect. It does solve a lot of problems, though, and it will continue to be improved. There will be improvements on this over time. So we're not saying that this solves everything forever, but we're saying it solves a lot right now. Be grateful for that, and we'll continue to make progress over time. So we're going to start using it. And I did promise a quick overview of Less. I don't think I need to go into a whole lot of detail, but I've got a couple slides because Less really makes me happy. So really quickly, we have some things that look a little bit like CSS, but not quite. We have a parent selector and child selector, and we have math. Math in CSS? What? This makes no sense. Using Less, we can do math. We can do equations. We can do addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, all sorts of basic equations using Less. So that's fantastic. Think of all the things you could do. You could do grid systems. You can do a maximum size, divide it down into a couple different subsections. It's all really great. We have wrap selectors. How many times have you been writing CSS going, why in the world can't I have a wrapped selector? A selector within a selector within a selector, just like the way I write my HTML markup. With Less, you can do this. It's fantastic. This is probably my favorite feature. It makes your code look so beautiful. You can look at it and you can see the inheritance. You can see everything very clearly. This is really great. We have reusable selectors. Remember that whole dry method, don't repeat yourself? We can do that with Less. We can say we want to take a style and then reuse that style in a couple different other styles. And we can add properties and add values to this and change it, and we can make 100% a different value, which would make the name of that function terrible, but you could do that. I wasn't thinking when I wrote that. We have variables. How many people are familiar with PHP or another programming language with variables? Isn't it great to have variables? Do you think you could do your jobs without variables? Would it be sucky if you didn't have variables? So we have variables in Less. We can assign values, we can change those values, and we can get one style sheet updated really, really quickly. It takes CSS to a whole new level. We have functions. Basically, functions, you pass a value, you give that value to a property, and you get the value and the property back. Really simple. And there's some built-in functions that I find really handy. This is a lighten function. And basically what this does is I'm giving it the color black, right? I'm giving it black here. And then I'm saying lighten black by 10%. What's that going to give me back?
80% transparency, right? 90% transparency.
It's not going to give me transparency.
What do you think, green?
It's going to give me a gray. It's going to give me a gray. It's going to lighten black by 10%. I could reverse that. I could give it white by 90%, and I think it'll actually give me the same value. So this is really cool. We have lighten. We've got darken. There's a cool function called spin. And if you imagine in your head, just imagine a color wheel. You've got a bunch of colors on a color wheel. And you give it a color and you say spin the color wheel by 180 degrees. And it's going to give you the inverse of that color. So you get complementary colors and things like that really easily with some built-in Less functions. All right. How does all this work? I don't know if I said compile, but the word compile is going to be a key word here. Compile is basically this. We're writing this Less, right? And it makes really no sense for any browser to look at Less. It's not compiled CSS. What happens is you take this Less file that you've written, and you run it through this thing called a compiler. The compiler's job is to take your Less and convert it into valid CSS at the end. So at the end result, you're going to serve to your browser compiled CSS that has been written through another program. And you're never going to really change that file directly. You're always going to go back to your Less, modify it, recompile, and go on. If you need a compiler and you don't have one, you can Google the word Less compiler. Really easy to find them. There's two types. There's command line and there's GUIs, and there's actually a JavaScript which I failed to put on here. But you can use either of these methods. As a PHP developer primarily, I'm going command line all the way. How many people have a compiler, a Less compiler? A few people. Do you prefer command line or a GUI? Any preferences? GUI? GUI? Really? Really? All right. We'll talk later. All right. All right. So back to Joomla. We're done with Less. We have hopefully a pretty good understanding of what it is and what it does at this point. How do we use all this stuff? We're going to look really quickly at Joomla 3.2, and we're going to look at the file system. We're going to look at the folders that come with Joomla. So here we have Joomla. You've downloaded Joomla. You've unzipped it. It's on your computer. And there's this folder in here called media. We have media as the root inside of Joomla. And if we go down, we find there's the JUI folder. And I've got CSS, JavaScript, and Less. These are the main components that we're going to be working with. In case the pathway wasn't clear here, it's your root, it's media, and then JUI, and then everything inside of there. So now we're going to build something. I promised to build a template live. I'm going to try to do that. Coding live is always really interesting because you'll break something and not be able to figure it out eventually. But we're gonna give it a shot. So here we have a really terrible viewpoint. Okay. This is a basic template that I wrote, and who hasn't built a Joomla template? A couple people. I'll briefly cover the structure here, and I'll zoom in so you can see. This is just a folder system right here, and I've mirrored Joomla's folder structure. So in Joomla's root, there's a folder called templates, And then there's folders for every single template. And what I've done is I've created a new folder for my new template, and I've called it Joomla Day Atlanta. And then inside that, you can pretty much do any structure you want. It's pretty standard to have your CSS, your JavaScript, your less in folders, and then images if you have images in subfolders under here. The key files that are going to matter are this index.php file, and the other one is template details. Template details is an XML file, and I'll show it to you really briefly. And all it does is have some basic information about your template. And you give it parameters in an XML format. So you give it things like name, version, creation date, all really basic. You're also going to tell it exactly which files you are giving your template. So if you're going to distribute this in some way, you're going to zip it up and put it up there for download and you want someone to install it, you'll say, here's all the files that I'm including with this template. And this tells the Joomla installer what to do with it. There's other parameters, there's positions, you can even do things like languages, there's configuration, which is like options in the template manager. All this stuff is going to be defined in your template details. This PHP file is pretty simple. What I'm doing here, I'll zoom in, is the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to be adding a style sheet, and we're going to build this style sheet in just a second. Can't see the whole line. I'll break it. So what we have here is this line reads basically add a style sheet. The style sheet is located in the templates directory, and then after the templates directory it's located in this particular template, and then after that it's in CSS and template CSS. We're going to get to that. The other things we're going to add are, remember the media GUI stuff? We've got HTML5. This is a JavaScript polyfill, and what this does is it backports new HTML5 elements like header and footer and main and aside, things like that. It backports them to like IE7 and IE8 basically. So it just makes HTML, modern HTML, work in those older browsers. We're going to include jQuery. jQuery is probably already going to be included from another extension, but I put it in there just in case. And then we're also going to include Bootstrap's components. So these are all of the different Bootstrap things, the functions that Bootstrap provides in one file, minified and made available in a single file. So I'm adding all these, I'm adding these to the head of an HTML document, all right? And where that actually matters is right here. I've gone out of PHP world, and now I'm entering HTML world here. And I've got HTML, I've got a doc type, and then I'm saying, give me the head. So everything I just said, put into the header, I'm now getting back out here along with a bunch of other stuff. The other two things that we're going to get are the message, which is just error messages and things like that that Joomla passes through, and then the component, which is any component you're loading via a menu item. So your home page, your contact form, anything like that, that's all going to get output through here. So I've got all this stuff. What I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this to my server. I've got a server called Joomla Day Atlanta. I'm going to upload all these files as they're here. And then I'm going to run over to my Joomla Day Atlanta website. I'm going to install this template. Got to get it installed. And I'm going to use the discover method. I'm not going to create an archive and upload it. Question? Okay, gotcha. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a discover. All right, we found my template, and I'm going to install it. This still doesn't work. All right, we've got it installed, and now I can make it my template. So we should see a really crappy template. There we go. There's our really crappy template. So all we've got at this point is, let's just take a look at the code that this generated for us. So I'll point out we've got, again, I apologize, this isn't readable. Okay, we've got our template, CSS is being pulled out, that's what we added. We've got jQuery. Some other things got added that we didn't really ask for, but other components or other extensions asked for. But we've got jQuery being loaded. We've got our HTML5 and our Bootstrap. All that's being loaded. And then we've got the markup generated by the content component. Well, we got all this stuff. So let's start doing some things to this template. can't really see it. I have another pane over here, which would be kind of nice to look at, but oh well. So step number 1 is we're going to add some markup here. We need to add some basic elements to this. So I'm going to add a header. And man, I wish this worked.
Can I ask you a silly question?
Yep.
I think I spaced out for a second and I didn't see where you got all this scripts.
All of these up here?
Yeah, the ones that, well, yeah.
Okay, so these are all located, remember that media folder in Joomla that comes with Joomla when you download Joomla? So all of these are located here. So if I go down, all of these, there's a bunch of different scripts in here. I've only asked for a couple. So the ones that I wanted were HTML5, and I wanted jQuery, which is in here. Okay, thanks. Yeah, but I can't read, so.
So basically, you just picked a couple and dragged them over.
Yes, what I did is I copied them and I copied them in here. Now this project is under Git version control. So if you're wondering what kind of workflow am I working with, I've ignored media. I don't want to track media. I just put it here because I wanted the code highlighting and things like that from my editor to find those files and index them for me so I can develop a little bit easier. But I'm not tracking them in my project. I'm just going to assume that if you're using Joomla, because I'm building a Joomla template, those resources are going to be available. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. All right, I give up. All right, so I've got my header here. I'm going to add my main. I'm going to add a footer. Put these in here. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to not remember the code that I need. You're going to have to pardon me, but I had a backup plan that didn't work, so I've got some notes here. Okay, here's what I wanted to do. We're going to look at less again in just a second. I'm going to stop here, and we're going to go into less. In this less right here, there is, where is it? I guess it's Bootstrap. There's this folder called Bootstrap. So these are all the individual Bootstrap components, and Bootstrap gives you one less file which imports them all at once. So this is less format at import, and basically what it's doing is it's finding all these other less files and it's bringing them into one place. From here, what I can do is I can use my compiler. I can compile this file. It's going to grab, inherit all of those other files, and give me a single file at the end. There is a variables.less, which I'm going to show you as well. So let's do this. Let's look at less. We've got template.less. What I've done, I copied that file. I put it over here. I changed the path to go over to those places, go back up into the media, and kind of resolve these pathing issues. And at this point in time, I should be able to compile a CSS file. So I'll zoom in here and just, oops, tell me where I'm at. I don't really like that. Oh shoot, I know what I did. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to do that CD. Yes. All right, here we go.
Is Joomla doing the compiling for you?
No, I have downloaded a Less compiler called, you got it from LESSC. And I have a slide that has basically Google Less compiler. You'll find it. It's really simple. Yes, CD. Oh, I know why. I'm in the wrong place. There we go. All right. What I've done is I've put my terminal cursor or my pointer into this repository. That's all I did. I screwed up at the beginning. Sorry about that. So what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at this directory, and I'm gonna stay right here, and I'm gonna compile my first CSS file. I'm gonna compile this less into .css. It's already done, but I'm gonna just show you the process of how you would do it. So I'm gonna type lessc, and this is calling out to the application, the terminal app called less, and I'm gonna give it two parameters. The first parameter is the less file I want to compile, and the second parameter is the CSS file I want to get on the output. So I'm going to give it less template.less. So I'm giving it this file. And it's going to generate this file even though it's already here. And if all goes well, I won't get any errors.
Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
So, is code compiled on a hosted server if you actually make changes to the less file and you refresh Joomla? Is it being?
There's ways to do that. Really, I think you would do it with a JavaScript compiler. There's JavaScript compilers that will detect changes in your less, recompile it for you, and you'll have it changed. I do all my compiling locally, and the reason is because in my overall workflow, I back out of this and I go into using Node and some other things, and I have a workflow that makes it important for me to do this locally, but you could do that. And Joomla has a built-in compiler in the template manager now to compile less. So you can actually compile Joomla compile less right from the back end. But for overall template development, this is a little bit more efficient.
From the perspective of the developer, what's the difference between, I mean, I get less in how it's used, but traditionally we would use like template.css.php, throw in our variables from the PHP, have it fire on runtime. What's the difference between using less and using the PHP method to generate the same thing?
Good question. Because PHP wasn't designed to do that, maybe?
Not sure it is.
Right. So, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. The only thing I can think of is that in an overall front-end development workflow where you've got something like Node running or, what is it that I use? I can't remember. I don't remember. Grunt. If you're using something like Grunt in your workflow, and you're just pulling in components and things like that, and also if you're working with, so the whole idea is if you're working with like less or different people who have written CSS or JavaScript or less in their app, and they're giving you that source code and you want to compile all of that down into a single file, things like that, minify it, all that stuff is going to be available to you. There's a bunch of reasons. I don't really know, actually, though. I mean, I'm sure you could continue doing what you're doing.
Well, I mean, we kind of toggle between the back and forth and what the client needs, but I was curious if there was any clear, I'm just looking for an excuse to go all that same PHP model, and I'm seeing that it has to be compiled, and that's a big issue, especially when you've got users on the site generating style.
Users are generating style? Maybe PHP is the way to go.
Okay.
Or at least for parts of it. I mean, I would say you could do a dual thing where you have like an overall template theme, and then if they're customizing certain sub parts of that, then sure, store stuff in the database and then pull it out. Yeah. Gotcha. I'll think about it. I'll think about it. You could just say the excuses Chad said to, and all right. We're gonna compile this less now that I'm in the right directory. All right, no errors. This less just got compiled. Fantastic. We have CSS here. Now, just so you know, we're never going to change the CSS file directly. We're not going to mess with it. We're always going to go back to the less or source file, do our changes there, and recompile. So I want to make some changes at this point. The first change I want to make is, in less, we have variables, right? There's a bunch of variables. Remember the variables and all the values? Well, I'm pulling these directly from Bootstrap, which is kind of nice, but again, I'm trying to build my own template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file in my less directory, and I'm going to call it variables.less, and I'm not going to add it to Git for now. A bunch of people just like freaked out. He's not going to track his code. It's okay. I'm just going to copy it straight over. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this path. And I'm going to directly include my local variables. I don't want to include Bootstraps. I want to include mine. So I'm going to change that. And I also, there's a couple other things that I want to include here now. I'm going to include responsive because I don't have that yet. So I'm going to import from up here, and I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to get the responsive file. So I've got responsive now. That wasn't in there before. I've also got variables. So I need those two things. Now I can recompile my less. And once I'm done with that, I got to upload this myself manually. So we should have no changes at this point. We should have nothing change. Should be exactly the same. With the exception of we're going to have working responsive, which is great. We got that. Now we're trying to do our own thing, so we're going to change some values here. Oops. And here's what I was going to change. Sorry, you have to look at my ugly notes. So we have link color here, right? And remember the darken and lighten? So we're passing the link color. We're saying we want the link color to be red. And rather than figuring out what color we want the hover to be, we're just saying darken the link color by 10% or 15% and make that the hover color. It's pretty easy. I'm going to make this black. Background, I was going to make this gray. Lighter gray. All right. Let's make some more changes. We're going to re-upload. Why didn't that work? Anyone know? Did something wrong? Unless we've given it this, and this is going to give it basically a width. And if we look at this right here, you'll see the width that Bootstrap kind of computed for us. Yep. That's not going to work. Live coding.
No pressure.
You had to taste the gourds, didn't you?
So, interesting. Let's move forward. And that is, it doesn't really achieve responsivity very easily. It just gives you a hard set pixel value, and what you have to do is you end up writing your own media queries or I wrote my own make column function, which does its own media queries to kind of build the columns in smaller. So that's how I've kind of overcome the fact that make column doesn't really help you all that much with responsive. I'm going to revert this back if I can. So is this making sense at this point? I know I got a little sidetracked on. I apologize for that. Great. So, any questions at this point? We've got a completed template. Wasn't built exactly the way I envisioned it, but we did get through it. Questions on LESSCSS template development, how to use these tools, where they are located. All right.
In your experience of trying to make things responsive, do you have, well, you said make column doesn't really work too well. Do you know other ones that do, as you like, or? So
first of all, if you go away from Bootstrap 2, which is what's included in Joomla, and you go to Bootstrap 3, the Bootstrap 3 make column is brilliant. It does everything properly. It downsizes properly. It works really well. So if you're using something like Node or Bower or Grunt and you're using all those tools, which is what I do, I'm going to include Bootstrap 3. I'm going to use make column, and that works really well. When I'm doing, if I have to stick with JUI and do native Bootstrap stuff, I just basically write my own. And I have a little snippet on Git, or Gist, of that. And basically I just look at the grids and I compile everything down using media queries to get the proper sizes at the responsive level. So I write my own utility.
Sure.
It's really simple. It's not hard at all.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So we did it. Here's some quick resources. All the code, as apparently crappy as it is available on GitHub. And Git Bootstrap has all the kind of the classes for like .make, makes rows, columns, things like that. So this is just the weirdest thing. Template.less. Something's wrong, but I don't really know what. Somehow I bet my style sheet's getting, or my less is getting changed back to something else before. Oh, I have an idea. Oh, look. I took out responsive. That's weird. Yeah, there's something putting it back. I'm not sure what. Okay. All of that to say, sometimes weird stuff happens.
Sometimes?
Sometimes. Okay. Let's try to move forward. Okay, so we've seen that there can be some weird stuff with less sometimes. If you've included a file that just does something weird, messed up. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. Okay. Let's finish. Try to build this template in 10 minutes we've got. So what I want to do is oh. I have a completed branch that I can't get to currently because I don't know my git commands. Okay, look at all that code I wrote. So what I've got here is some Bootstrap code and some non-Bootstrap code, and I'm just going to show you the relationships of these things. So this is a container, and in container in Bootstrap world is a special property. Basically gives you a fixed width with auto centering and everything like that. If you want to look at the value, we can look at the value. Sets of width, things like that. I've built a navbar. Again, these are all kind of proprietary Bootstrap class names, which I don't really prefer, but they're what makes Bootstrap kind of the thing. What I really wanted to show you is this whole thing called this layouts file. And in layouts, again, this is all less. Let me zoom in. I have created some elements to use Bootstrap properties, but I wanted to do it in a way that's called semantic, right? I wanted to write code not using things like .row or .span because they're kind of not names that don't mean anything to anyone but people who use Bootstrap. So I have decided to use this function called makeColumn, and I've created a column that is 9 kind of units wide. And overall in Bootstrap in general, you get 12 units total. So I've said I want a main position, and I want it to be 9 of my 12 units. I'm going to create a sidebar. I'm going to have that be 3 of my units. In total, that's my 12, right? So I've got this. I'm going to recompile my less. Yeah. And hope it doesn't screw up too badly. And we're going to take another look at this template. Oh, I know what I need to do. I have auto syncing, but it doesn't work when you check out repositories. There we go. So here's a completed Joomla template, and let's just take a look at some of the CSS or the properties that I wrote in this file over here. So the first thing I did is I gave it .main, or main in this case, main. So that's this file right here. So I've said main. I want main to be making a column, and again, passing this is the function, right? Unless we've given it this, and this is going to give it basically a width. And if we look at this right here, you'll see the width that Bootstrap kind of computed for us. So right here we see main. I've given it, and it's given me this width of 700 out of here. I could change this value. I could say I want this to be 10, and I want this to be 2, and it's just going to say, all right, make the main part a little bit wider, make the side column a little bit smaller. Re-upload my CSS file, and now we've got 780 pixels instead of 700. Again, this is mostly responsive. Now, there's one thing that doesn't work too well with make column, and that is it doesn't really achieve responsivity very easily. It just gives you a hard set pixel value, and what you have to do is you end up writing your own media queries or writing. I wrote my own make column function, which does its own media queries to kind of build the columns in smaller. So that's how I've kind of overcome the fact that make column doesn't really help you all that much with responsive. I'm going to revert this back if I can. So is this making sense at this point? I know I got a little sidetracked, and I apologize for that. Great. So, any questions at this point? Anything? We've got a completed template. It wasn't built exactly the way I envisioned it, but we did get through it. Questions on LESSCSS template development, how to use these tools, where they are located?
All right. Well, and if you ever loading you up with stuff, that's my actual personal contact information and stuff. Cool. Awesome. And my card's the shiny one.
So first of all, if you go away from Bootstrap 2, which is what's included in Joomla, and you go to Bootstrap 3, the Bootstrap 3 make column is brilliant. It does everything properly. It downsizes properly. It works really well. So if you're using something like Node or Bower or Grunt and you're using all those tools, which is what I do, I'm going to include Bootstrap 3. I'm going to use make column, and that works really well. When I'm doing, if I have to stick with JUI and do native Bootstrap stuff, I just basically write my own. And I have a little snippet on Git, or on Gist, of that. And basically I just look at the grids and I compile everything down using media queries to get the proper sizes at the responsive level. So I write my own utility. It's really simple. It's not hard at all. All right. So we did it. Here's some quick resources. All the code, as apparently crappy as it is available on GitHub, and Git Bootstrap has all the kind of the classes for like .make, makes rows, columns, things like that. I do have a couple partners I work with. These are big names in Joomla land. We work with Savvy Panda a lot. We work with Anything Digital a lot, and we also work with Joomla. These guys have brought us template work. We do a lot of front-end development for these guys, and so we appreciate them. If you want to look me up anywhere, Twitter, my website, our corporate website, which doesn't exist actually, and then my email address. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.